William Samoei Ruto will not free the UDA administration from the yokes of IMF and the World Banks of this world, then we are still going to suffer as a nation. 4 days ago, the State House hosted International Monetary Fund Managing Director Christina Georgieva in State House, and immediately that team took off. The country is now soaked in a deep debate about punitive, illegal, and non-counterproductive tax policies. It is not a coincidence that the international lenders were in the country in the eve of William Ruto's first budget, inaugural budget. And an outlook of President Ruto's inaugural budget, according to me, occasions, or rather is the climax of breakaway with the hustlers, because actually it occasions the end of hustler agenda. Raila Odinga reacted to the tax proposals, saying there's a new team will object the proposals and resist if Ruto uses the vote majority in the National Assembly to get his way. In this podcast, we are going to look at what the former Mandera Senator, Bill Okero, is telling the country while dragging the IMF in this debate. This is the bold analysis. I narrowed down to these three tax proposals. Very ridiculous. And in fact, I don't know, it doesn't just get. The first one is this, the housing fund, which to me looks like a con. The finance affordable housing project, which was a flagship project under President Uhuru Kenyatta and was picked, and the country was actually asking why that one was singled out amongst the ones that are being dropped. There was a 3% deduction on the gross, on the salary, on the basic salary of the civil servants. Initially, it was supposed to be voluntary, but under the new tax regime that is being introduced, it's supposed to be a must. Can you get the position of Raila Odinga on this?
Unilaterally, Kenya Kwanza wants to deduct 3% of basic salaries to finance affordable housing scheme. How the regime arrived at 3% and not 1 or 2, nobody knows. We find it curious that while not everyone is qualified for the proposed affordable housing regime, everyone is expected to pay. This is illegal borrowing. According to the bill, those who do not qualify for affordable houses will have their monies refunded or transferred to the beneficiaries after 7 years. There's no mention of interest accrued on the money. You're borrowing money without paying interest. It is not clear why an employee who does not need a house would have his or her money tied up in a housing scheme when he or she would wish to spend it on farming or just feeding the family.
And I want to agree with quite a number of civil servants who are even subscribers in this channel who are actually somewhat calling me selling cake, saying if there is a con in that budget, the housing fund is a con. First, why do you want to deduct? You know, we're in a country where we are deducting 3% from civil servants, while those in the private sector are not facing the same acts. But remember, when it comes to inflation, it doesn't know who is a civil servant and who is in the private sector. So those civil servants are kinda disadvantaged. It has also been seen as a saving. But the question here is government building these houses, or what is their role? Because if you look at the art check, the way it is being implemented, the affordable housing projects is majorly a PPP, public-private partnership, where in most instances, the government is giving land and then private proprietors are the ones that are building the houses. Then through the scheme, the government will review and work on a framework in which when the houses are being are occupied, the investors will scoop back their money. The affordable housing is a wrong scoop. And I think the civil servants are really talking about it. Now I want us to look at the other one. The taxation on per diem. Per diem is what you are given, what is given to staff when you are probably on a mission, even outside. Let's say, for example, like for me, I used to work somewhere. I used to work somewhere in PS Kenya. So we could go to Kilifi. Used to work on a project called Maverick, capacity building on women to on uptake of FP, especially the advanced women. So we could be given our per diem was 6K. Now government is saying that per diem is going to be taxed 30%. Where? You know, this money is supposed to be money helping you to maybe pay the hotel and your food and so. And the calculation of that per diem depends on it. The challenge is this. There are normally some, let's say like international conventions, for example, workshops outside the country, where there is attendance from government side and those from the private side, or even NGOs. NGOs, for example, are just doing the 10K or the 50 or the 20. But on government, it's also attracting a tax. Now, this money is not an income. Actually, it's not supposed to be treated as income. In fact, I remember, and I get it. Under UN Habitat, this money, I worked in UN Habitat, this money used not to be given to you in the pocket. And actually, it's like a grant. Immediately you come back, you must bring the receipts. You head direct to the finance department and make sure that you actually account for that money. That money is not money. I don't know how it's happening in government. Someone should tell us that. Don't you go to finance and bring their account for that money? That money is not supposed to be an income. So looks ridiculous. And I think that's what Raila was talking about here.
Out of the blues, Kenya Kwanza wants to tax money paid to officers on duty at 30%. How then do those officers meet their expenses? Since when did reimbursements get to be treated as income? We find this requirement extremely punitive. We oppose it. We've known that this per diem was being paid by people to be spent to defray expenses wherever they are traveling. And those costs, the cost of living in those countries already been worked out by the government. If you are taxing it, you are therefore subjecting these officers to suffering wherever they travel.
Even if you want to tax it, 30% is a big rate. That's 30% is such a big rate. No. 30%, no. I think those who are civil servants will agree with me. 30%, yes, even if you want to treat it as an income, because at the end of the day, maybe mtu ataenda hotelia tu dhao. But then, what will it be? If it's supposed to, at least take 5% or some 2%. I think the collection is just too much. Now, if Francis Atwoli thought leading to UDA was going to be something good for even the workers of Kenya, then allow me use the phrase that he was fattened for slaughter. The finance bill is saying that associations will have to be taxed. I don't know, is it 15% of the income from associations, trade unions? Remember, this association, trade associations, are getting money from membership, subscription by members. These members have already been taxed. Their payrolls are already taxed. The goods they are buying is already taxed. Even the association. So I don't know. I may not understand it. Are associations profit-making organizations? Are they companies? But maybe Atwoli maybe went there and told President Ruto and the team that, look here, we are running huge accounts, huge ledgers. And so Ruto might have peeped through the ledgers and realized, okay, here we'll have to get into it. And it's a bit of those excesses. And I agree with this. The problem we are facing as a country is about the challenge of excesses. We have an oversized government, and as to what David Ndii confessed in Citizen TV, there is a lot of wastage.
Abolish money being spent on political operations that are disguised as relief food distribution or fundraisers. It makes no sense at all for a Kenya Kwanza operative to spend 20 million shillings on a chopper to distribute 1 million worth of food. It makes no sense for a principal secretary to spend 10 million shillings on a chopper to deliver 200,000 shillings at a fundraiser. This madness must stop in the interest of austerity.
I listened to Bill Okero. Bill Okero is a former Mandera senator, and by then he was also a chair of budget committee in the Senate then. He's actually putting it into context that it is not a coincidence that William Ruto's inaugural budget, immediately it's going at a time when IMF were in the country. According to him, there is a direct connection between William Ruto's budget policies, especially these draconian policies, with the IMF pampering. The way they came here and pampered William Ruto, that we are just very safe. In fact, he made it very clear that so long as William Ruto stick to the West, IMF is remaining our problem.
So that's why when you're out there, you find the economy is bad. But when you look at the figures in Treasury, you find, these things are doing. The second thing I want to contextualize with is the IMF. This government came and they faced West. They became the darling of the West.
Yeah.
Today, in the US and in UK and those countries, Kenya is their darling. And when you become the darling of the West, then you have to, they send IMF and World Bank running. Welcome. You want money? And IMF is about one thing: borrow more and tax more in order to pay that loan. This is why last week the IMF managing director, who was in the country, was so emphatic. She said, our debt is sustainable.
Yeah.
The government can borrow. We are not at risk of defaulting our loans. She even was asked about the Eurobond, over $2 billion that's due soon. And she said, no, what's the problem? If you can pay it through taxes, we can get loans from commercial banks. Kenya government is doing well. So IMF is now the one calling the shots. And where you see IMF, prepare for more taxes, because their main concern is that you should be able to pay.
I can't disagree that this budget could have been authored by the white men that were in the country last week. It's a possibility that they authored it. The Ndii administration must then allow this country to have a candid discussion about the budget policies without politically, emotionally wiping the nation that we are fixing Uhuru mess. The Ndii-leaning Kenyans, it is about then time you rise above the political persuasion so that we have a candid and sober discussion as a country. I believe you, when over the weekend and from now, the political leadership will use we are fixing Uhuru problem to wipe your emotions and whitewash your reasoning so that you cannot ask the hard questions. Some of these taxes are just illegal, punitive, and non-counterproductive. You know, there is even one of, I looked at it, there is one of the tax dispute tribunal. If you have to complain about a tax, you need to pay 20% of the disputable amount to KRA before you lodge complaints. That's one thing that is just supposed to avoid this. Why it is time that Ruto must listen to us, and he must listen to these complaints about the tax storm. On this one, it will not be brushed by politics. This is why I see that Ruto must have to listen. The population will devise evasion routes, the traders will find ways to evade, and KRA will most likely miss the target. One of the reasons why KRA can miss its target is because looking at the amount of tax that you're putting there, that you're demanding, you need a bigger infrastructure and resources to collect that tax. It's because we've just decided that we've blinded our way that the only way of making money is collecting the taxes. There is, for example, if you want to get something from per diems, instead of putting them up there off the cliff and taxing them, why don't you just reduce them? Just harmonize the per diem downwards instead of, so that you remain with a reserve. Instead of having them high, then you tax. Honestly, it doesn't make sense. You're actually using money to collect, because even that KRA will need a huge human capital to execute these tax policies. If we will force it down on people's throat, the population can resist. And when the population resists, it can actually devise ways of evasion. Raila pushing for people's action can cut across the political persuasion. That's what I think William Ruto team might need to understand. That there is questions of tax. For example, when we are talking about the PAE, 35% for those earning above 500,000, I can tell you all those around Raila Odinga was making that press briefing, people in the dais are in that group. And it doesn't matter whether Azimio or Kenya Kwanza. So some of this will actually will be fueling the sabotage. And if you are not careful, if Raila can call for a mass action against these issues, even those sitting next to William Ruto, you realize that they might support. Even the police know that the per diem is not going to affect them. Those who are supposed to control. So there is a risk into this. This budget, Ruto must have to relook and listen, because it kills the hustler agenda that was hawked during the campaign period. It's a big win for Raila, because I can tell you, this makes him cut the people's defender card. If you want to help, you campaigned on uplifting Kenyans, uplifting the people at the lower part of the pyramid, but you are raiding payrolls, some of these payrolls that are supposed to help these people. How are these people going to get jobs if you raid direct taxing by raiding people's payrolls lowers the disposable income? And with low disposable income, there's low purchasing power, manufacturing shrinks, and the more manufacturing shrinks, people come to be absorbed in companies, because even the scale of production can go down. Then, Ruto must have to relook this factor, because you will end up having demoralized civil servants. And demoralized civil servants, what is the resultant effect? It can derail the UDA agenda. Those who, over 750 civil servants that are being raided, whose payrolls are being raided, are people that probably you might think they sit politically in conformity with it, but that is not the truth. The truth here is, the more people feel like they are pressed, they'll most likely just do it for the sake of doing it. So the UDA agenda, starting from the members of parliament, and I'm waiting to see how the members of parliament are now in a fix on how they are going to stick to political alienation and leave the hustler, or what exactly is it. This is my final punch. KRA must devise ways and different approaches to collecting the money. We cannot use the approaches that were used in back then the days when people would come from university and get jobs. Direct taxation worked in the 90s because it was easy because people would come out and get to work. Now, 70% or nearly 80% of the workforce are getting absorbed in the informal sector. So these are people that are working not on the payroll. These are people working on a day-to-day basis. So with such tax regimes, they are not in conformity with the changing labor market. I think there is a point into what I'm making. Someone should listen to this and make the necessary adjustments. Otherwise, you're setting yourself, you're blowing yourself off, you're blowing yourself up against the masses. That's my bold.